Hello, I'm Ellie Dowding.
And I'm Lee Coates. Together we are in Accord and the Accord Initiative.
You're listening to Accord Talks, a podcast about sustainability and compliance and advice processes supporting the financial advice sector. We hope you're all well.
Right, today it's just the two of us, no guest this time. And we wanted to spend this episode talking through the FCA's 2610 consultation, supporting the pensions and investment advice rules, and also our own response to it.
Yeah, I think that this is a really important consultation. It was open for consultation from March and feedback closed actually on the 22nd of May. I have to say, I found all the issues within this paper fascinating. So, on the face of it, to sum it up, CP2610 is about simplifying the advice rules, supporting more proportionate advice, making ongoing services more flexible, and helping the market offer a broader range of support.
Which, of course, we broadly support.
Yes, we do. We absolutely support the direction of travel. I think anything that helps more consumers access good quality support and gives firms more confidence to provide advice in a proportionate way has to be welcomed with open arms.
But, and there is a but.
Yeah, there is always a but.
I do agree this paper is fascinating and extremely wide-ranging, but our main point in the feedback was that there is still a critical area that feels underdeveloped, and that is the consistent recognition and integration of non-financial objectives, particularly sustainability, ethical, and values-based preferences across all advice and support formats.
Yeah, thank you for putting that so succinctly.
Well,
I think it's really important to say that this is not us trying to bolt sustainability onto a consultation where it doesn't belong. It
heaven
absolutely
forbid.
yeah, it absolutely does belong here. Because if the rules are being simplified and if the market is being encouraged to offer more limited scope advice, simplified advice, targeted support, and more flexible ongoing services, then we absolutely have to ask, where do client values and preferences sit in that new landscape?
I feel very strongly on this one. I don't believe the answer should be that these conversations only happen within comprehensive advice.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. Because that risks creating a two-tier system, and we cannot find ourselves in a place where clients who can access and pay for full advice may have their values and preferences properly explored, but clients going through a simpler journey may not even be aware that they can express those preferences.
And that is where we think the potential harm sits.
Yeah, we do. So the consultation quite rightly and very clearly talks about proportionality,
Mhm.
sufficient information, consumer duty, consumer understanding, and foreseeable harm. But we have put forward the view that non financial harm needs to be recognised more explicitly within all of that.
Okay, I think we should take a second to unpack that a bit. First, by answering, what do we mean when we say non financial harm? What we're referring to is the potential harm that may arise if a client ends up invested in a way that conflicts with their values, beliefs, or identity.
Yeah, and that may not show up as a financial loss.
Exactly, yeah. So the portfolio might perform perfectly well, the risk profile may be technically right, the time horizon may be appropriate, but if the client later discovers they are invested in areas that conflict with deeply held ethical, religious, or sustainability preferences, that could create distress, loss of trust, and disengagement and poor client outcomes.
Yeah, and I think the critical point to make here is that under consumer duty, firms are already expected to avoid foreseeable harm and support clients in pursuing their financial objectives. So the question is, are firms consistently allowing and giving clients the opportunity to express those wider objectives?
Yeah, and a bigger question perhaps is that are clients even aware that they can?
Yeah, I think that's the key point. It cannot be assumed that retail clients know they can express investment preferences beyond risk and return, which are well established within all advice processes. Many clients will not even know to volunteer broader preferences unless they are prompted in a neutral, safe, structured way.
Okay, so that That brings us neatly to the first big theme in CP2610, the move away from necessary information to sufficient information. And let's start there.
Yeah. Okay. So the FCA is proposing that firms should not feel they have to gather exhaustive information in every case.
Mhm.
Instead, they should gather sufficient information to reasonably demonstrate suitability, depending on the nature and scope of the service and the complexity of the recommendation.
And we agree with that. It makes excellent sense. Let's imagine for a moment a client wanting straightforward advice on a stocks and shares ISA. They do not necessarily need a full comprehensive advice process.
Agree, but our point is that sufficient information must include non financial objectives at the pre sale point of all advice formats where they are relevant to client outcomes.
Yeah, because otherwise there is a risk that values based considerations become the first thing to be dropped in a simplified advice process.
Exactly. Personally, I think that that would be a mistake.
Mhm.
Proportionality should not mean ignoring client preferences. What it should mean is proportionately asking about them.
I think that is an important distinction. We're not saying every client needs a long sustainability questionnaire. In fact, we're embracing simplification and saying quite the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, the FCA in the CP gives a really useful clarification that firms do not always need complex psychometric tools or detailed questionnaires for attitude to risk. So, our recommendations include that the same thinking should apply to sustainability and ethical preferences.
So firms need appropriate guidance to take a simple and proportionate approach.
Yeah, like a neutral prompt, clear pre meeting information, a simple explanation of broad investment pathways, a way of recording whether the client has preferences or not. That should not be an onerous process.
And we do say this a lot. It's not about pushing clients into sustainable investments. It's all about giving them the choice rather than structurally removing that choice.
Yeah, that is a really important point, I think. Any process must be outcome neutral. Some clients will say they've got strong preferences. Some may say they want conventional investing as a choice. Some say they're not sure and they want more information. And all of those can be valid outcomes.
Absolutely. The regulatory issue is whether the client had the opportunity to make an informed choice, not being placed in a situation where that choice has been removed.
Okay, and that links to another part of the consultation, it's knowledge and experience.
Yep. So, the FCA is proposing that firms do not always need to assess knowledge and experience where it would deliver no discernible benefit. So, for this, picture simpler products designed for clients with little or no investment experience.
Again, we agree with the intent, but in our response, we made
Yeah.
the point that firms cannot assume clients know they can express the values based preferences. At the point of advice, many retail investors simply just don't know that this is a legitimate part of, or even a possible part of, the conversation.
Yeah, so we think if firms are expected to support consumer understanding, that should include helping clients understand that investment preferences can include sustainability, ethical, or values related considerations.
Yeah, so this is why in our feedback, we have specifically asked for clearer guidance equivalent to the guidance given around risk profiling.
Yeah, and it's so important because the industry has spent decades building structured processes around risk questionnaires, capacity for loss, risk warnings, suitability wording, all of that is now well established.
Yeah, it is. Whereas, as we know,
Mhm.
client values and sustainability preferences are still patchy and evolving across the market. Some firms do it very well, of course. Some firms may ask a basic ESG question, but have limited internal knowledge in the firm. Some may avoid the subject completely because they might be worried about the complexity, greenwashing, politics, or suitability risk, etc., etc.
Yes, there's a multitude of reasons. A quick spoiler for you all, we will be releasing results from our industry survey, which explores this topic in depth in the next few weeks. Heads up, the results are really interesting. Back on topic though, I do have to say that avoiding asking clients about their preferences is becoming so much harder to justify.
Yeah, it really is. So, the consumer duty is not just about avoiding financial loss, it's about understanding clients, supporting informed decisions, and delivering good outcomes.
Right, so the next area we responded to was suitability reports. This one has been in the press a lot.
Yeah, it has. And I have to say, we strongly support the FCA's direction here. Suitability reports should be concise, proportionate, and consumer focused. They should not be treated and viewed as defensive compliance documents dressed up as client communications.
Yeah, that is so important. A suitability report is meant to help the client understand the recommendation. Although, with 31 years' experience as an advisor, I do know that it can feel better from a compliance point of view to chuck everything in just in case. But that really doesn't work and isn't client friendly.
Yeah, the suitability letter is not a tick box exercise. It can be helpful as a file reviewer, but it's not to prove to a file reviewer that every possible regulatory phrase has been included.
Exactly. And this links directly to consumer understanding, doesn't it? If a client cannot understand the report or it's too long for them to bother to read, it's not doing its job.
Yeah, so saying all this, we agree with the FCA's proposal to align requirements and encourage clearer and more proportionate reports. But again, with client preferences ranging from conventional or ESG for risk or sustainable or ethical, we think that the report should always explain how those preferences were considered.
And if they were not relevant or the client had no preferences, that should be referenced in the suitability letter too.
Yeah, it's about evidence, isn't it?
Mhm.
Not an assumption. It's just knowing your client fully.
Yep. Okay, moving on again. Another important proposal, I think, is the FCA's plan to retire FG 17.8 and embed the principles of proportionality into the new rules.
Yeah, we agree with this one as well. But we feel that there is lots of opportunity in this one because we strongly encourage the FCA to include case studies involving sustainability and ethical preferences.
Yeah, the case studies really matter because it shows how firms operationalize. Firms often do not just need principles, they need the practical examples of what good looks like.
Exactly. Case studies are really important for the compliance community as well, actually. And we like to think that we've helped in our feedback to the FCA by giving some suggested examples for the case studies, such as where values based preferences affect suitability or where failure to capture preferences could lead to harm, and where values may intersect with vulnerability.
Mahaha, you've mentioned our favourite subject, vulnerability.
Hmm.
Let's talk about that, shall we? This is one of the strongest points in our response.
Yeah, it is. And it was actually the final question in the consultation paper, and I think our longest response. So, in our feedback on equality and diversity considerations, we have highlighted the view that values and beliefs are not neutral or secondary preferences, and that they can be closely linked to identity, religion, or beliefs, and in some cases, protected characteristics.
Yeah, and where investments conflict with those beliefs, the client may experience distress, disengagement, or reduced confidence in the advice process. So, for this reason, we think values related vulnerability should be explicitly recognized. And again, for complete clarity, this does not mean every client with a belief is vulnerable.
No, of course not. That would be completely wrong. But the point is that vulnerability can be situational. Harm may arise not from the belief itself, but from the belief being overlooked or misunderstood or unintentionally breached by the advice.
Yeah, and just to emphasize that point, Ellie, I'd remind you of a recent meeting we had with an advisor who confirmed to us that he recently picked up a new client from another advisor because the client felt that when her religious beliefs were discussed, the other advisor made her feel that this was not important and nothing to do with the investment advice process. And this is why firms need processes that invite disclosure in a safe, neutral, and non judgmental way.
Yeah, and I think all this is particularly important in simplified advice,
Mm.
targeted support, and guidance based journeys. Because if those routes do not create space for values based disclosure at outset as well, some groups of consumers could be disadvantaged. And that then shows us a two-tier risk again.
Yes, if values related needs are only properly captured in full comprehensive advice, then consumers using more affordable or simplified services may receive a lesser version of client understanding. And that's not where our industry should be heading.
No, it's not. The whole point of the advice guidance boundary review is to create a continuum of support. I strongly think that that continuum needs to carry through the core principles of consumer duty.
Completely agree. Strong views there, but
Yep.
important stuff. Now let's move on to ongoing advice services.
Yep. Okay. So the FCA is proposing to replace the annual suitability requirement with a more flexible periodic review requirement aligned with the consumer duty.
Once again, we agree. Annual reviews may be right for many clients, but they're not automatically right for everyone.
No, they're not. Some clients may need more frequent contact, some may need less. What matters is whether the service meets the client's needs, whether the client understands what they're actually paying for, whether it represents fair value. This consultation proposal represents significant shift.
Yeah, it does. Our point for ongoing services is that they also create an opportunity to revisit alignment with client values. This is because preferences can change, particularly if things shift from a geopolitical perspective. Also, a client's circumstances can change, their understanding can change, the market changes too. So, periodic review should not only ask, is the investment suitable financially? We've put forward in our response that we believe advisors should also consider whether the investment remains aligned with any stated preferences, especially where those preferences form part of the original recommendation.
Yeah, exactly. If a client previously stated sustainability or ethical preferences, there should absolutely be a process to make sure that the advice has not drifted away from that.
Yep, which links to disengaged clients, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So in this paper, the FCA is proposing guidance for firms handling clients who are paying for ongoing services but are not engaging. So we agree with this, and we also support the idea of good and poor practice examples.
Yep. So we recommended that case studies should include disengaged clients with previously stated values.
Yeah, an example of that might be if a client has expressed strong preferences and then becomes disengaged for whatever reason. Firms need to think carefully. Is the client still receiving fair value? Are their preferences still being respected? Is there a risk of drift? Has the firm made reasonable attempts to re engage them?
And if fees are continuing, firms need to be able to evidence what service is actually being delivered for those fees.
Yeah, consumer duty makes that unavoidable.
Now, as part of our feedback to CP2610, we also responded to the cost benefit analysis and wider economic impact.
Yeah, this part was interesting. In our feedback, we have encouraged the FCA to think more broadly that if consumers are consistently made aware of sustainability preferences and supported in acting on them, there could be capital allocation effects.
And to put that into plain English, money may flow differently.
Yeah, that's right. So, more informed client preference conversations could increase flows into sustainable capital markets and improve access to funding for firms aligned with sustainability outcomes.
And that links directly to government and public policy.
Yeah, it does. So we've suggested that the FCA reconsider its position that these proposals are not relevant to climate and environmental legislation. We can see a clear transmission mechanism. Consumer preferences influence investment allocation. Investment allocation influences capital flows,
Mhm.
and capital flows influence real economy outcomes.
Yeah, and just to be clear to our listeners, that does not mean advice firms are responsible for solving climate change or that they can mitigate systemic risks related to the impact of climate change.
No, absolutely not. But it does mean that the advice process is part of the capital allocation chain. And if the regulator is simplifying the advice framework, we think there is an opportunity to recognise that connection more explicitly.
Okay, that's it. We have responded and submitted. So, where does all of this leave us?
Okay, yeah. So a quick summary. I think I think our overall position is supportive and constructive. I think the CP2610 is a massive, meaningful step towards a more proportionate advice framework. The opportunity is, I think, enormous. But if financial objectives are not explicitly recognised, there is a risk that simplified advice becomes financially suitable but personally misaligned.
That's a great way of putting it, Ellie. I think the danger is not that firms ask too much about values, the danger is they ask too little, or ask inconsistently, or only ask clients who can afford a full advice process. We need to move away from the idea that client preferences are a specialist ESG add on. They are part of knowing your client fully. Now, good fact finding should flow as follows: financial objectives, risk tolerance, capacity for loss, knowledge and experience, vulnerability considerations, values, and preferences. Advisors need to understand that all of these things are connected.
Yeah, so I think that the advice community now needs practical support, examples and guidance to demonstrate that the answer is not complicated. So firms need proportionate prompts, clear language, consistent recording, and good governance.
Yeah, and they need to be able to evidence that clients were allowed to express preferences, even or especially where there are no preferences at all.
Yeah, whether the client chooses conventional investing, sustainable investing, ethical exclusions, or no preference, the important thing is that the choice belongs to the client.
That is very consumer duty.
Yes, it is. And I think that that is the thread running through our feedback, isn't it?
Yeah.
Consumer duty is about better outcomes, and better outcomes require better understanding.
So to summarize our ask of the FCA, it's really quite simple. As the advice rules are simplified, make sure non financial objectives are not left behind, thereby potentially creating a two-tier advice system. Recognize values related harm and support proportionate preference conversations.
Yeah, and a big one for me is to provide practical case studies and also embed consumer awareness at the outset of all advice and support journeys. Because I may be on repeat here, clients cannot express preferences that they don't know that they're able to have.
And that means firms cannot deliver fully aligned outcomes if they never ask.
Exactly.
So we will leave it there for today. We hope that's been a useful walkthrough of CP2610 and our response to it. As always, this podcast is intended to highlight issues, it's not regulated advice.
Nope. So thank you very much for listening to Accord Talks, and thanks as always to our Accord Initiative partners
Yep.
for making it possible for us to spend the time making these podcasts. So, as always, for keen people, we will add our full written response to the FCA into the show notes.
Thanks for listening.
We've loved it. We hope you have too.